panel. Bill Kristol joins us here. What was your reaction to Congresswoman Omar's clarification? She said she was not making a moral comparison. She was not equating terrorist organizations with democratic countries. She was, I think she was just listing different countries that had cases before the International Criminal Court. But of course, the United States, Afghanistan, Israel listed alongside the Taliban and Hamas.
I mean, it's not the kind of question I would have asked, but she's entitled to ask questions. She was asking Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, who does not agree with her, and now House Democratic leadership doesn't agree with her. Joe Biden doesn't agree with her. So I think, honestly, she's in a very small sliver of the Democratic Party. And I think the Democrats did a pretty good job politically, and I would say substantively, I agree with them, in making clear that, you know, whatever her motives, whatever her intentions, she doesn't the point of view that she seems to have expressed is not a mainstream point of view of the Democratic Party.
Let me bring in Abdul El-Sayed. So what do you think about Speaker Pelosi and House leadership? They stayed silent on the issue. Then Congresswoman Omar issued her clarification. Then they said what they said. Do you think that they should have defended Omar more, or what's your take?
Well, unfortunately, we've seen the kind of divisiveness coming out of the GOP for a long time, trying to divide us along our values to try and justify the kinds of excursions abroad, the kinds of things that my fellow member on this panel, Bill Kristol, advocated for 18 years ago in the war in Iraq. And so the question here is, what are our main values? If we believe in dignity and we believe in human rights and we believe in justice, the question is, do we apply those evenly here and abroad? And whatever she tweeted, you know, she clarified what she meant, and she wasn't trying to draw false equivalencies. But the bigger picture here is, what is our responsibility abroad? What is our responsibility to critique ourselves when we are part and parcel of the kinds of violence that we saw, whether it was the Israeli army against Gazans killing 67 children in Gaza, or it was the Iraq War?
Go ahead, Bill.
No, I just think Joe Biden voted for the Iraq War. I mean, I'm a Joe Biden Democrat, and I think more Democrat. I'm not saying they all agree with me on the Iraq War.
Joe Biden Democrat or Joe Biden Republican?
I'm sort of a Joe Biden Democrat and Republican.
Okay.
For now, I'm a Republican trying to help Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. And honestly, look, it's a fair debate. There are Ilhan Omar Democrats and there are Joe Biden Democrats. But I think the fact is the Joe Biden Democrats are a pretty substantial majority.
I don't think it's a debate, Bill. I don't think Joe Biden is a Bill Kristol Republican. And I'll tell you that
I agree with that.
I agree with that. About the war. And we've decided that was one of the darkest moments in our history. And it was based in the same kind of failure to take on whether or not our adventurism abroad and the innocent lives it took was consistent with our values. It clearly was not. And we have a responsibility to keep having this conversation.
Yeah, no, I take that. And I would love to focus on today's news and even, you know, the 11-day military conflict between Israel and Hamas, and less so on the Iraq War, although we could do 7 hours on that. I certainly appreciate that note. But I want to get both your takes on something that Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, who's a member of the squad, Congresswoman from Michigan, she said, quote, "Freedom of speech doesn't exist for Muslim women in Congress. The benefit of the doubt doesn't exist for Muslim women in Congress. House Democratic leadership should be ashamed of its relentless, exclusive tone policing of Congresswomen of color." Both Tlaib and Omar, of course, have been criticized and asked to apologize for anti-Semitic tropes before. What's your take on that, Bill? And then I'll come to you, Abdul.
I don't think it's true that the Democrats are a big party, a tolerant party, and we had a Democratic Muslim candidate for lieutenant governor who ran a good race in Virginia just the other day, and there was no policing of him. So I don't really buy the argument that this is bigotry or excluding certain points of view. It's simply she said her piece, and Nancy Pelosi and a lot of the other Democrats said theirs.
Abdul?
Yeah, Jake, the reason I brought up the Iraq War is because we can't divorce this moment from the context, the history that I believe Representative Omar was speaking to. And I think when someone like Rashida Tlaib tweets something like that, what she's responding to is the fact that many of the folks who come from that part of the world, whose parents came from that part of the world, we are a lot closer to the consequences of the very same American adventurism that we're talking about here today, whether it's the war in Iraq or our subsidization of foreign militaries, be it in Israel or Saudi Arabia. And our families have to live with the consequences of that. And there is a response that is a lot more visceral when the people you know and love, who have names, are made to suffer because of American policy. And I think the failure to see the broader point that Representative Omar was intending to communicate, I think, is it takes, unfortunately, borrows from the playbook of Trumpism, which tries to divide us by identity rather than uniting us around ideals.
Bill, you're shaking your head. What are you?
I think it's the opposite of Trumpism. And incidentally, Afghanistan, where I believe we've been fighting side by side with our Muslim allies for 20 years. I mean, and I myself wish we would leave a few thousand troops there to help them resist the terrorists. That's not our adventurism. That's not bigotry. That's not short-sightedness, in my view. That's a perfectly honorable conduct of American foreign policy.
Abdul, final word?
I mean, I just say, if you're defending a war we've been fighting for 20 years, and another war that we fought for 18 years, then, we have to keep having this conversation about whether or not our foreign policy is consistent with our ideals. And I'm glad that that's a conversation we're having in the Democratic Party, because our ideals of justice, our ideals of human dignity, our ideals of human rights suggest that we should not be engaging and involving ourselves in ways that take innocent lives. And I'll stand by that any day. And I think President Biden would stand by that, as would, I think, Speaker Pelosi.
And I'm glad we're having that debate on this show. And thanks so much for being here, Bill and Abdul. And incidentally, I'm listening to a great podcast right now. The new season of Slow Burn from Slate is all about the attack on Iraq, the invasion, the buildup. It's really fascinating. So I'm not against revisiting those decisions at all. Abdul and Bill, thanks so much for joining us.